All right, because if there's one name that suddenly turns this entire Knicks draft rumor from interesting into wait a minute, something real might be happening here. It's not the picks, it's not the cap math, it's not even the front office noise. It's Mitchell Robinson. And if you're a Knicks fan, you already know that name carries weight in a way that goes way beyond box scores. Because every time this franchise starts talking about flexibility, win-now moves, or draft night maneuvering, the same uncomfortable question eventually shows up. What happens to big man holding down the paint? And this time, it doesn't feel like random speculation. It feels like the kind of situation that's building pressure underneath the surface. So, let's get into what's really going on here. The conversation starts with comments tied to James Dolan and the Knicks draft direction. But honestly, that's just the spark. The real fire is what those comments imply about roster construction. The New York Knicks, under the leadership structure of New York Knicks, with basketball operations guided by Leon Rose, are once again hovering around that familiar crossroads. Do they keep building depth through the draft, or do they convert assets into established contributors? On the surface, it sounds like a normal front office debate, but underneath it, there's a much sharper edge forming. Because keeping multiple draft picks, especially in the 2026 range around the late first round, doesn't just affect future rotation spots. It affects money. It affects cap structure. And most importantly, it affects which veterans become expendable. And that's where Mitchell Robinson enters the center of the conversation. Let's be honest. Robinson isn't just another player on the roster. He's one of the few interior anchors this team has relied on for years. Rim protection, offensive rebounding, paint presence. He brings a type of impact that doesn't always show up in flashy highlight reels, but absolutely shows up when it matters. The problem? That type of impact also comes with financial weight, durability questions, and roster balancing complications in a league that is increasingly unforgiving under the second apron system. And if the Knicks are truly serious about holding both draft picks and maximizing cheap rookie contracts, then every mid to large contract on the roster gets a little harder to justify. That's just the reality. Now, here's where things get frustrating from a fan perspective. Because on one hand, you hear the argument, keep the picks, stay flexible, find cost-controlled talent. On the other hand, you're also hearing whispers that the Knicks might prefer veterans over rookies to stay competitive right now. Those two ideas don't comfortably coexist unless something else gives. And that something else often ends up being a player like Robinson. Not because he's the problem, he isn't, but because he is one of the few movable pieces that actually carries real value in the league. And that's the part that should make Knicks fans uneasy. Because we've seen this movie before in different forms. When front offices start chasing marginal cap advantages, the conversation slowly shifts away from stars and toward efficient decisions. And efficient decisions in NBA front offices often translate into tough calls on beloved or important rotation players. And that brings us back to Dolan's comments and the draft strategy implications. If the Knicks are indeed planning to keep the 24th and 31st picks in the 2026 NBA draft, then the financial picture becomes extremely tight. Late first-round contracts are cheap, yes, but they still add up when you're already managing a roster build to compete at the top of the Eastern Conference. And that means something has to balance out on the other side. That's where Robinson becomes the focal point again. Because he's not just a player. He's a contract. He's a cap figure. He's a roster decision waiting to be evaluated through a financial lens instead of a basketball one. And if there's one thing Knicks fans have learned over the years, it's that when basketball decisions start getting filtered through financial constraints, nothing is guaranteed to stay stable. Now, let's be clear. There's no confirmed move here. No official decision. No report saying Robinson is on the trade block. But the logic chain is starting to form whether people want to admit it or not. Keep draft picks, add rookie contracts, tighten cap flexibility, evaluate mid-tier veteran contracts, consider moving expensive or injury-prone assets. Mitchell Robinson becomes part of the conversation. That's the domino effect. And I know that's not what fans want to hear, but pretending it's not happening doesn't make it less real. What makes the situation even more tense is the identity conflict within the organization itself. This isn't a rebuilding team anymore. This is a team trying to compete for a title window. That changes everything, because rebuilding teams can afford patience with players like Robinson. Contending teams don't always get that luxury if the front office believes it can upgrade, redistribute money, or balance the roster differently. And that's where Leon Rose and the Knicks decision-makers are under pressure to get every move right. Because once you start making decisions to preserve flexibility, you can accidentally weaken the very foundation that made you competitive in the first place. And for Knicks fans watching all of this unfold, it feels like walking a tightrope with no safety net. One wrong step and the entire structure shifts. Now let's talk about the emotional side for a second, because this matters too. Mitchell Robinson is one of those players fans actually connect with, not because he dominates headlines, but because of what he represents: effort, defense, physicality, and consistency in a system that often lacks stability. And those are exactly the kinds of players who get caught in front office reshuffling when bigger strategic decisions take priority. So when fans hear draft flexibility or cap optimization, what they're really hearing, whether it's said out loud or not, is potential change to the core rotation. And that's where frustration starts to build. Because it always feels like the Knicks are one step away from locking things in, but never fully commit to stability long enough to build continuity. And I'm not going to pretend that's easy to watch. If you're a Knicks fan, you're probably asking the same question right now. Why does every strategic discussion eventually circle back to losing a key piece instead of just improving the roster around them? That's the tension sitting at the heart of this entire draft conversation. And until that tension is resolved, names like Mitchell Robinson are going to keep coming up, whether fans like it or not. So here's where I'll leave this. If the Knicks really are leaning into keeping both draft picks, then they're also committing to a chain reaction that affects the entire roster structure. And Robinson is right at the center of that ripple effect. Nothing official has happened. Nothing is confirmed. But the logic is there. And in the NBA, logic usually wins out over time. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the Knicks should protect Mitchell Robinson at all costs and build around him as part of the core? Or do you think he's exactly the kind of piece that gets moved if this team wants to stay flexible and chase a championship window? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching this and you're frustrated by how often the Knicks end up in these what-if conversations instead of clear decisions, hit that like button so I know I'm not the only one thinking it. Also, make sure you subscribe to Knicks News, because if the situation develops the way it feels like it's heading, the next update could get very real very fast. And one last thing, be honest with me. Are we watching a front office that's finally building something sustainable, or are we just seeing another cycle where roster stability gets sacrificed in the name of flexibility again?